Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Sandy Rosenthal, with the podcast Beat the Big Guys. And I've been counting the days until my guest, who's with me today, will join us. And her name is Janet Crouch. Hey, Janet.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Sandy.
You're so welcome. I just cannot wait to hear your story and in which you prevailed against your homeowners association. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
I just cannot wait to hear the story, and I can't wait, and I'm sure our listeners are gonna find it really fascinating as well, and it just goes to show you the big guys can take all sorts of forms. It doesn't have to necessarily be a chemical company or an oil company. It can be a homeowners association. So, because our listeners don't know where you're from, I'm going to just fill them in a little bit on those details before we get started, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. So Janet is a nature-loving homeowner who lives with her husband in a community governed by a homeowners association. After over a dozen years of nurturing an environmentally friendly native plant garden in their front and backyard, their homeowners association demanded that they remove the gardens and replace it with turf grass. Janet and Jeff fought back. After a protracted battle with the homeowners association, they retained most of their garden and changed state law to help ensure that other homeowners do not suffer at the hands of their homeowners association simply for gardening with native plants in an environmentally friendly manner. Janet, are you familiar with the TV show, the series, The X Files?
Yes,
Did you know that in one of their episodes, the homeowners association in the episode were aliens?
I did see that.
I I to remember that episode to this day, and of course, that episode was on television, what, 25 years ago?
Yes, it's been a long time.
But they're still out there.
They are, and they're more than ever.
More than ever. You've got that right. So on that friendly, lighthearted note, of course, real homeowners associations or HOAs are not from outer space, although you might feel that way sometime. But please tell us the story about your goal to hold on to your, from what I understand, they're called pollinator garden.
Yes, it's a pollinator garden. It's for butterflies and all the creatures in our yard. We back to a park, so we have lots of animals that wander through the whole community. They're not here just because of our garden. We just happen to have the plants that help sustain butterflies and birds, bees, and other creatures. And we've had it we moved in 1999, and my husband started a garden that year. And then as we learned more about environmentally friendly landscaping and pollinator gardening, um, we started using more native plants in our garden. And so over many years, our garden, did the same thing every year. It's different in different seasons. We plant it every year. And then suddenly in 2017, our homeowners association sent us a letter telling us that we needed to clean up our yard. We needed to mow our grass and pull the weeds. So my husband, we do have
Clean
some
up your
grass.
yard.
Clean up, right? We do have some grass paths, I know, that go through our yard, and my husband always mowed those. They were always mowed. So there were probably a few weeds which we pulled, but I think what they were really talking about were our native plants, which had been there for over a dozen years at that time. So we, write back a letter saying we are gardening in this way because we have an environmentally friendly garden that attracts wildlife and it's good for the children in the neighborhood. It's good for the planet. So lo and behold, about a month later, we received a cease and desist letter from the attorney that the association had hired several years before, telling us that we had to remove our entire garden and replace it with turf grass. So it was a very unprofessional letter. We thought it was inaccurate. We didn't think that we were violating anything in our community's governing documents. And so we decided to immediately contact an attorney because the reputation of the law firm that our HOA hired was not so good. And we knew from the tone of the letter that we weren't going to get very far. So with just trying to amicably deal with them. So we hired an attorney who wrote back a letter for us trying to, let them know that we didn't think we had any violations and to amicably resolve the matter. And then we waited many months, which is what happens oftentimes in HOAs. And so every day we're under threat of having them come and destroy our garden, file a lawsuit against us. We didn't know what was going to happen next. During all this time, people are taking pictures of our home. It was a very difficult period of time. Eventually, about 6 months later, we got a letter. And the letter said, we were waiting for the peak growth of your garden. And now we've decided that it really does need to be removed and you need to plant grass. So we followed the steps in our homeowners documents and the governing documents for our community, and we requested a hearing. And our attorney, advised us that at the hearing we could probably maybe talk to some of the board members and try to resolve, talk to them amicably to see if there was any interest in resolving it. But we realized very quickly that this hearing that was presided over by the attorney hired by the HOA, that there was not going to be any sort of that kind of discussion, because when we tried, the attorney told me to shut up when I was talking to a board member during the hearing that we had. My sister was talking about native plants, just quietly describing, the benefits of native plants, and he told her to shut up. He told my husband at one point to shut up. So it was just a really difficult hearing to get through, and we realized that we were not going to have the opportunity to try to talk to the board members outside of this legal process. So we then waited many, many months. I think it was the next spring. This was in September. It was many months later that we got the results of the hearing. And they didn't reflect what had really happened during this meeting. There was just sort of like this list of inaccurate results, comments on what had happened. So at that point, we waited a couple of months, and that's when we ended up filing a lawsuit against the HOA, because we knew we were following the process as it's meant to happen. It was excruciating, painful, and we never knew what was going to happen next. And so finally we just said, we've had enough. We're going to file a lawsuit. And then a couple of months later, instead of letting the lawsuit kind of work its way through the process, the HOA filed a lawsuit, countersued us over the very same matters that we had sued them over. So unfortunately, they raised the legal fees even higher for the community, and who knows why. I mean, I think we all know why. Somebody makes money off of that. And also in the meantime, I had been contacting every organization I could think of who might be able to provide some advice or assistance, or, just have a conversation to figure out a next step. And one of I got advice from someone to contact our state legislators. So I did that, and we didn't immediately hear anything. And that was in 2019. But a few months later, we did hear from a legislative assistant who was interested in our story, and the delegate was interested in introducing legislation. And so it was introduced, and it was to protect environmentally friendly yards and homeowners associations in Maryland. And it was during COVID, though. So unfortunately, it was flying through the legislature, but it stopped because of COVID. Very few things got through in 2020. But it was introduced the next year, and it did go all of the way through. And became law in 2021, HB 322, which requires HOAs to allow environmentally friendly gardens, and also indicates that they cannot require turf grass lawns. So, but in the meantime, our lawsuit is still going through the process.
Hmm.
And we had a hearing in July of 2019 with a July of 2020 with a magistrate. And we realized then that this could, if it ended up in court, it could go either way. You might have a judge who's friendly to who likes turf grass lawns and doesn't really listen to what's going on in the case. And so we were considering what to do, and we eventually later that year decided to offer one more kind of settlement proposal, which the HOA ended up agreeing to. And so we only had to we took out along our sidewalk a 6-foot buffer of native plants. And then the other requirement was that we take out a 3-foot buffer on the side of the complaining neighbor of plants. But as it turned out, we already had 3 feet of grass on that side of our home. So we didn't have to take anything out on the complaining neighbor side of our home. So that was the settlement. And then the other thing that I wouldn't agree to move forward with the settlement if we weren't allowed to talk about it, because a lot of homeowners are silenced. They settle, they might end up with an okay settlement, but then they're not allowed to speak. And after everything that we had been through, I decided that I couldn't sign off in good conscience on a settlement that didn't allow us to tell our story. So that was the other piece of our settlement. And then the law. So
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Yay for the butterflies. Yay for Janet and Jeff. Yay, yay, yay. I just this is such an amazing story. There's so many things about this. I don't know where to begin. But first, just let me say thank you for everyone in this country or the world that just wants to help to make the world a better place.
right. I mean, and I think, Sandy, that was one of the things in the very beginning, is that what they were asking us to do was fundamentally wrong. Not only was it not required by the governing documents of our community, but it was fundamentally wrong. And I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to save our garden and fight back and help other people.
Well, I think you've just touched on the core ingredient to changing the world, to standing up to beat the big guys. It's in your soul. It's there. It's irrefutable, undeniable. It goes to bed with you. It wakes up with you, and it is always there. And that's what gets you through. And you don't punch a time clock. It's who you are. And you met the requirements on how to beat the big guys, but it was a little bit more than that, and we're going to talk about a little of the nuts and bolts right now, if that's
Mm-hmm.
okay, unless there's anything else you'd like to add to this incredible
No,
story.
absolutely. I just wanted to get through the high points, and then I'm happy to answer
Okay.
whatever questions.
Well, I also want to mention to add that not only native gardens, good for the environment and attract animals, they also use less insecticides and pesticides,
So we don't use any.
or none,
Yes.
sometimes none to little, minimal to none.
Yes.
And that is just so much better on the environment. And your native plants like the light conditions and the wet conditions. That's the whole point of native plants. And people like the idea of exotic gardens. They're really not good for the environment unless you have it in a
That's right.
greenhouse. Mhm.
That's absolutely right.
So the first thing I'd like to point out is is that Janet, the first thing she did, I want everyone out there to notice this. She went through the channels first. She did the hearing. She did the necessary things that you have to do to show that you just tried to have a conversation. You tried. You know,
That's
you
absolutely
did the
right.
hearing, and what else
Right.
did you do, to just have a conversation about it? Let's work this out like human beings do.
Yeah, so we made flyers 2 or 3 times and put them around our whole community
Mhm.
so that people would know what the board was spending their money on. And ultimately, the board decided that it was important enough to destroy a native garden that they spent over $100,000 of the community's money in this process. Yes. So we made others aware. And so one of the things that I often sort of still struggle with is that we had a lot of people who quietly supported us, but they were scared, or for whatever reason, maybe they had been friends with the complaining neighbor or whatever, but they didn't speak up publicly. And so I wonder often if just a couple of people had spoken up and said, what is going on here, and supported us publicly, if there may have been a different outcome, something may have happened differently along the way.
I'm really glad you brought that up because whenever you're trying to beat the big guy, that is a recurring thing. People who are afraid, who agree with you, but are afraid to speak up, but they might lose a job or they
Mm-hmm.
might lose, usually it's job security. They're concerned about their jobs, but
Mm-hmm.
it could be they're concerned about hurting somebody's feelings. And it's
Right.
always going to be an issue, and you can't let that stop you. And you didn't let it stop you. So you went through the proper channel so that when the time came to file a lawsuit, if anyone asked you, did you just try to sit down and talk about it? You can say, yes, we did.
That's right. And it is very difficult to maintain your patience during years worth of going through this, but you have to. And thank goodness we had a good lawyer who advised us in the right way, who provided us with that was the way you need to go. And he was absolutely right.
Then and the next thing in line with that, for those of you out there that have a tough challenge, it is if you can get an attorney, get one. Now, you don't have to get a high paying, um, you know, international law firm or national law firm. An, an attorney in the field is just fine, just an attorney letterhead. And whenever you send a letter with an attorney letterhead on it, it'll be it'll be more likely to get noticed and will go straight to the attorney for the other organization that you're working with. If you can get one, get one. You don't have to have an attorney, but if you can get one, get one. You'd be surprised how often someone's brother-in-law would be happy to step up. I actually was threatened with lawsuit in my work with levies.org. And
Mhm.
when word got out in the newspaper that I was threatened with lawsuit, my phone rang off the hook. I have literally a hook with a phone with a hook here. The phone rang off the hook, literally with attorneys running to me saying, I'll represent you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You
So if you
know,
can
that's
get an attorney, get one.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the case of HOAs, it can be very difficult to find an attorney who will represent you because a lot of attorneys don't represent homeowners against homeowners associations because they're notoriously difficult to deal with. And it can be very difficult to win because the governing documents are weighted on the side of the HOA and not on the side of the homeowner. So it's really important to know what is in your governing documents before you
Definitely.
proceed.
So, Janet, during those months of stress where all you could do was wait, how did you get through that? What did you do to
So
get through that?
it was doing research, it was watching, googling, HOA, seeing that X-Files episode, just doing everything I could, right? Calling, making constant phone calls, trying to contact the media. A lot of times you don't get calls back, but it was the only way that I could continue moving forward. I had to keep trying to solve the problem. And so that meant reaching out to other people because I didn't have the answer. So, and there are a lot of people, if you reach out through social media, who have a lot of ideas. Some of them you can use, many of them you can't, but sometimes there is, something there that's really helpful, like the person who suggested we get in touch with our legislators.
Is there anything you could advise our listeners on? Because stress is a terrible thing.
It
And
really is.
obviously, one of the ways you dealt with it is you worked. You
Hmm.
found things to do. And that was and work is a great distractor from stress. But what did you do? I mean, is there anything you did from more like a, I don't know, bubble baths or some that sort of thing that you did?
Yeah, I mean, I really unfortunately didn't have a lot of stress relief during that period of time. I couldn't, it was hard to unwind. I even
Mm.
had a hard time going into my garden because of the people taking pictures and the next door neighbor. And so I really found my relief through work, through working on it when I wasn't working at my regular job, after hours or on the weekend. That's what I was focusing on.
I totally understand. I remember, just to show you, to empathize a little bit, after the levees broke in New Orleans, and I was working and trying to get to the bottom of, why did this happen? It was
Mhm.
very difficult for me to do something like watch a rerun of The X Files or watch a
Right.
rerun of anything. It was difficult to, well, you couldn't even enjoy your garden
No,
during
no,
that time, which is what the whole
no.
point of it was.
Right. That's absolutely right.
Would you
Yeah,
would you mhm.
go ahead.
Would you say would it be fair to say that you might have undergone some sort of this is a big word, like traumatic
Yeah.
stress syndrome over this whole, you can't believe this is actually happening over a couple of milkweed plants.
Right. So I definitely, my husband's a therapist, so I know that PTSD is like, I don't have PTSD, but I definitely still get triggered every time I do an interview, every time I talk about it, I have to go back and look at these crazy documents and it brings me back. And it is extremely difficult and stressful. And maybe someday it won't be, but it does bring back all of the feelings, which are really, really tough.
Well, I'm glad your husband's a therapist, and that would be, I bet that probably was very helpful because I know I leaned on my family for support, getting me through that hard
Absolutely.
time.
And he still went out in the garden. He didn't have the same trouble going outside and doing that as I did. So that was good. It was still his place of retreat after work to work in the garden and get some relief that way.
I can't help but notice that you felt like the details of the hearing were changed, that you felt like you were seeing, minutes or whatever what it
Yes.
was. You felt like it wasn't properly recorded, so I'm guessing it was not video recorded or audio recorded.
No, it was not.
Mm,
And why, I don't know, but
hmm.
it was definitely not appropriately um transcribed. Yeah.
And it was months till you received the
Right.
transcription, so which mean by then, it's impossible any human being would have a normal human being would have
Would
unless you're
have My
superhuman.
brother-in-law took copious notes, so we did have notes, and there were some things that were so outlandish that we knew just off the top of our heads had not been said.
So how much was, during this fracas, were there any, media reports on it as it was happening?
No, during, we could not get anybody to pay
Hmm,
attention.
hmm,
And we also heard that from someone that one of the local papers they'd been threatened to not report on these cases, otherwise they would be sued.
hmm,
So the first big, I mean, the Washington Post did a brief. They included our story, a bit of it amongst another story about native plants. But the first big media exposure, more broadly, was the New York Times article that Cara Buckley wrote, that was published in December of last year.
and that was after it was all over.
That was way after.
Way after it
Yes.
was all over. So,
Yes.
everyone out there, take note. The fact that the media does not report on something is in no way a reflection on the value of what's going on or whether it's important.
That's absolutely right.
No reflection whatsoever. And the converse is also true. Just because something is in the news, that doesn't mean it is important. It's it might not be. You might be reading something that's completely distorted, but
That's absolutely
never
right.
look. On the other hand, no, even though I just said that, it is good to get media coverage. If you can get media coverage, get it. It's like an attorney. If you can get it, go for it because it's free and it furthers the reach of your message.
Absolutely. And we really hoped and I really tried, but we were never able to get anybody to pick up on it while it was going on.
Oh, Janet, I was doing my work for 2 solid years and never had any media coverage. No,
Wow.
no real media coverage. I mean, there were bloggers. Bloggers were a thing. Any person could call themselves a blogger, and they acted like they were the media. They're not. They're
Mm-hmm.
not journalists.
Right.
They want to be treated like journalists, but they don't want to act like journalists. Is what I like to say about
Right.
them.
That's right.
Uh, um, so yeah, I went 2 years with no coverage until finally I discovered the Army Corps of Engineers doing something that was so big and so awful that the media had to cover it. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was like
Mm-hmm.
how is the media going to get away with this for not covering this? Because what I would do is I would just put out the news to my own supporters, and by then I had like 20,000 supporters.
Mm-hmm.
But then the media started sitting up and taking note, only because it would be embarrassing if they didn't. But again,
That's right.
that yes, the media will help further the reach of your message, but no, if they don't, you know, the heck with them. It's their loss.
That's right.
Their
You have to
loss.
keep fighting. You have to keep fighting.
Ab-
Yes.
Absolutely correct. So this story is so amazing. I hope it needs to continue to be out there. I am definitely going to push this story out there. I can't wait. I have a neighbor with a pollinator garden. I can't wait to tell her about you, and I'm going to get her to make sure that she listened to this episode. We love her pollinator garden, but this is New Orleans, N- and
Right.
and New Orleans is the laissez-faire city, you know.
Right.
So it's for something like that to be going on here is not unusual. But we do have, even in the city of New Orleans, we do have some gated communities.
Mm-hmm.
So where I would be surprised if something like that would be allowed. Well, I think this is a fabulous story. Thank you for standing up for what is right. Thank you for the butterflies. Tell me about the animals that come by and
Oh,
check out your
so we
garden.
have we have lots of different sorts of creatures. We have bunnies that have babies in our yard every year. There are deer that wander around our neighborhood. We have all kinds of birds and lots of different varieties of butterflies and moths and insects. It's all part of the ecosystem. So we have a very balanced sort of ecosystem in our yard that flows back into the park amongst, a lot of turf grass. So they have a sanctuary here.
And in addition to, I'm so jealous. I mean, I want bunnies in my yard too. I wish burrowing owls. I would love burrowing
uh,
owls. But
we do
no,
have
I live.
owls in the woods behind our house. They don't
Mhm.
nest right at our house, but we do see them in the back. It's beautiful. They're beautiful.
And there's another huge benefit of these pollinator gardens is they take pressure off of the municipal drainage system. Uh,
Absolutely.
they're
Absolutely.
more they absorb better
They
than the
do. They
turf
have
grass.
deeper roots. Yeah. And
Right.
we've had in Ellicott City, Maryland, just a few miles down the road, 2 100-year floods within the last 6 years, 7 years,
Wow.
something like that. Yeah, devastating flooding. And if more people had plants like these, native plants and
Mhm.
gardens, it would at least help. I mean, it's not going to hurt. There's turf grass everywhere. It doesn't help the problem.
Bravo, bravo, Janet. So we're about run out of time. Is there anything you can share with our listeners who are trying to beat the big guys in their own neighborhoods and communities?
I would say just if you get a violation notice, read it carefully, read your documents. And if you are not in violation of anything, if they're twisting the documents, which is what they did in our case, um, please fight back. It takes all of us, and don't give up, and reach out, keep calling people, do your research, and don't give up.
Don't give up. I totally agree. That is Number one is have it in your soul. Number two, don't give up.
Yes.
Don't give up. That's fabulous advice. Janet, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all, our listeners, for joining us today. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Be sure to rate, subscribe, and like the podcast on all your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Okay, stay with me.